People come from locks and chains, they see you now through dead Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to talk about note lengths. So, we've talked about the beat a little bit, we've talked about measure, we've talked about how we assigned a certain number of beats to a measure. Now, there are notes that are associated with these beat values. We're going to look at specifically the note lengths and their associated values, because it will change the way we sort of use measures. Because right now we've agreed that there's 4, but there are occasions when a quarter note, where we'll have 5 quarter notes in a measure, and that will be a measure. So we'll get 5 beats, or we'll give the beat, instead of it being a quarter note, we'll give it to the 8th note. And there's all this weird stuff, but first we have to understand, so we got our measure idea in our head, like, oh, you could break up a measure. That's really important to be able to write your music down. Now we need to write down our notes, and these notes are associated with beat values, sort of just like a dead on. A quarter note is always this, an 8th note is always this, and occasionally things do get a little weird and sort of abstract. There's always the one situation where things change, but let's really quick look at them. I'm going to look at also writing notes by hand. I'm not going to write notes by hand in this video, but I'm going to point out things that if you're learning via a program, you're going to need to know in case you ever want to try writing a note by hand, because I think writing music by hand is like way cooler and way more imaginative, and it takes more skill, and it's the way some of the greatest music ever was written. So I think that it's a really cool thing to endeavor to do. But if you want to sit there and not have problems, because I actually had problems the first time I tried to do it, because I was so used to working in a program, I had never considered some of the things that I just took for granted. So there's that. We're not going to consider note pitches yet, so we're not talking about note names, but we are going to talk about how they look different depending on how you put them on the staff. Another thing you're going to notice is that it automatically spaces things for us as we put them in. That's fine. I don't mind too much. It also automatically calculates our rests for us. We're going to talk about rests in the next video. It'll probably be a much shorter video because it will be pretty much the same principle, it's only with rests. So first off, in MuseScore, you can hit 5, 6, whatever, and you can obtain different values here. So I'm going to use 5. So you hit 5 and it puts me on the quarter note, and you need to go to note input mode. This will allow me to enter notes. And there's a variety of ways to do this. I'm going to do the hand click in method. So if you put a note down, this is a quarter note. So let's define what this quarter note is. A quarter note gets 1 beat. That's the definition of a quarter note. It gets 1 beat. Not necessarily always gets the beat. Sometimes an 8th note can get the beat, and there are reasons for that we'll talk about later. So, but for now, our understanding will suffice. A quarter note gets the beat. That's a perfectly fine way of understanding it. So we have a quarter note, and so right now our measure has 4 beats. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can fill it up with 4 quarter notes, and you see that it automatically calculates this for us. This isn't necessarily to our benefit, because when you're writing music by hand, you have to be able to do this, and it's not hard. It's super easy. It's just math. It's just a little bit of adding, just math. So just so you know, just so you're aware. Now you'll notice a couple things. This note part here, this black part, that defines it as a quarter note. That's called the note head. So this little black head is the note head, and this little line is called the note stem. This note stem will face a direction, and this just makes it more intelligible for people to read. And so whenever the note is below middle C, and middle C is arguable. Middle C could go either way depending on your melodic line. I'm sure there's more academic rules about how this works, and I'm sure I probably at one time had to know them, but right now I don't. So, and I've always just kind of done, if it looks okay to me, then it's fine. I played a fair deal of music, so it's like reading a book. You can look at something and sort of see that it's spaced funny or misspelled, or it just feels unnatural. And so the same thing goes sort of with written music for musicians. So it's important to note that if you're below this middle line, this is actually on the treble clef, it's a C, but we're not going to worry about that right now. We're just going to call it the middle space, I guess, technically. If you're below that, your stem will go up on the, on the right side. And if you're above it or on it the way it's interpreting it right now, then your stem goes down. The reason they do this is it's just intelligible. If you give musicians with notes like this with the stems on the other side, or they're going weird directions, or they're not perfectly up and down, it's just going to look really weird. It's going to be much more difficult to interpret, because musicians, they'll look at it and they'll go through their brain and recognize patterns optically, and it'll trigger things in their muscles, and they'll just do all this stuff goes down in their head. Besides, like, they can still read like wonky looking music. I'm not saying like, oh, they can't read it anymore. I'm just saying it's harder. And obviously, the more severely poorly you write it, then the harder it gets. So, okay, so that's a quarter note. And now let's go to a half note. So a half note is 2 beats. So if we turn this into a half note, bang. Same rules for the stem apply, only now it gets 2 beats. So we can fit 2 of them into our measure of 4 beats. So, okay, that's fine and dandy. So that's 2. Here's a whole note. Now this one is just a note head, and it's 4 beats. So it takes up, usually it'll take up a whole measure. In some cases, whole notes are a little funny because you don't have 4 beats in a measure, so you can't use a whole note. It's like that note just won't ever exist unless you change a meter somewhere. So it gets 4 beats, and then you have these last 2, which are used far less often. They are the double whole note and the double whole, and I'm not sure what this one's called, but I guess it's called the longa. I've actually never seen this one written in music before as its full notation, because you'd need a weird key time signature to write that. So I have seen the double whole note though. So the double whole note here, we can't represent it. It's not going to show up like this, but it'll do what's called a tie. So it'll tie our notes together representing 8 beats. So this is worth 4 beats and this is worth 4 beats. And this thing is a tie that will tie them together. Now ties can also be confused with slurs. So we're going to not deal with ties right now. But just so you know, that's a tie. So this one's worth 8, and this one is worth 16 beats. So it doubles the length again from 8 to 16. That's how that works. Once again, you only should probably have to worry about up to the whole note. Now we come down here to the 8th note. The 8th note is half of a quarter note, even though it says 8th. So you think 1/8 of a beat, and I probably have said that at some point, but everyone that knows music theory knows that. I mean, like half of a quarter note. Like it's just super intuitive. It's half of a quarter note when people say that. So this is half a quarter note, and so you can fit 8 of them in a measure. So that makes perfect sense. Or you can fit 8 of them in 4 beats you can have 8. And so these things kind of stem from having 4 beats in a measure. I didn't choose that number arbitrarily. Most popular music is written in it. So I'm gonna really quick delete these. I wonder if there's a keyboard shortcut for that. N is the keyboard shortcut. That's good to know. Okay, so now we have 16ths. That's half of a 8th note. So you can fit 16 of them in a 4 beat measure. And so we can have 1, 2, 3, 4. And really quick, a quick note about these things. Let's go back and make a few more observations about what is going on here. So on an 8th note, we see that when we place it on the staff, on an 8th note, we see that we can get 2 options here. We can have one with a flag, and if the stem points the way we would expect it to if it was going down, but if we move it down, it points up, but we have this flag. So this flag hangs off. 1 flag means an 8th note. More flags, the more flags you add, that just means you half it again and again and again. If we come over here, do it again, and except for this time, now it's barred. So you can bar these things together to make them far easier to read. I've seen old music used to not have barring. Well, not old music. I mean, some music back in the old days. Like I've got hymn books that use this notation, and you've got a whole bunch of these notes next to each other, which is generally frowned upon. Like you're just not going to write music like that. It's just harder to read, unnecessarily difficult to read. So there are occasions though where, okay, you bar to the beat, but you don't know what that means yet. So don't worry about it. But generally you're going to want to do this just as a rule of thumb for what you're doing. If you get to the point where you need to bar to the beat, which we'll actually talk about pretty soon, then you'll know about all this stuff anyway, so it won't matter. So that's that jazz. You can go over to a 16th note, and a 16th note has two bars when you write that one. And likewise, as a single note, it has 2 flags. And so you can kind of see how that's represented. And the same goes on. You get down to 32nd notes, and you can get down. I've seen these occasionally. These are 128th notes. It has 4 bars. They're super, super tiny notes, rhythmically speaking. They are half of a half of a half of a half of a quarter note. Half of a quarter note. And they go really fast. They're written in, like, I played some pieces by Bach that had these in them. Very interesting kind of deal here. And so that's what the note links are all about. I find it so interesting that subs divide what you already have selected. See, Finale never did that to me. So it's kind of a foreign concept to me that it just all of a sudden splits it in half when I select things. But I'm sure I'll get used to it. So there's a few other tricky situations that are going to go down here. These are the dots. So the way the dot works, and you're going to see these in a couple different forms. We're going to talk about just one and sort of leave it at that. We're just going to talk about one dot. That's as far as we're going to go. We don't really need to talk about two dots. So put down a note, and we're going to enter our note input value. So we've got a quarter note. It's worth 1 beat. Well, if you take that 1 beat, divide it in half. So we got half a beat, and then you put a dot on it. This is now worth a quarter note plus an eighth note. So this is how the dot works, okay? And this won't work with a whole note quite as nice. So we'll use a half note. These are the most common ways to sort of see it. So let's come over here. Oh man, I don't even know what I just did. Okay. So we have a half note. A dot, what it does is it takes your note, whatever bass note you have. So we have a half note. It's worth 2 beats. And we say, hey, we're going to put a dot on you. Well, that's the same as adding half of whatever the original value is. So our value is 2 beats. And so if we divide that, we get 1 beat left over. So we add our 2 beats to our half of our original value, which would be 1. And so we get 3 beats. So we would expect this to turn into a quarter note rest. And that's exactly what happens. So that's what goes down. You'll see dots. Sometimes you see sort of really weird rhythms, but it's essentially what's going on. We're going to talk about rhythm and what they all mean later. Right now, you just need to get it in your head that quarter note is 1 beat, 2 beats, 4 beats, half a beat, half of a beat, or 1/4 of a beat, and so on and so forth. So 4 of these in 1 beat, 2 of these in 1 beat, 1 in 1 beat, 1 of these in 2 beats, so on and so forth. I don't worry too much about 30-second notes. We're not going to dive in there. Most music will use them as flourishes or little ornaments to, bedazzle what's going on. They're really, really nifty in jazz, and sometimes they are in, people write them as grace notes rather than this. So we'll talk about all that stuff later. But that's that. That's note values. Those are the basics on note values. I hope I didn't blow your brain out with too much information. This isn't that hard. But it is something that you need to know in order for us to move on. And you just have to know it cold. You just have to know, oh, that's this amount. And as we get into counting and rhythm and stuff, you'll see the applications that this knowledge can give you. So right now, just walk around your house, go, what's a quarter note? It's 1 beat. What's a half note? That's that. What's a dotted half note? Just know it cold. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day. Hey, Composer Gloves here. This is the first video in how to make a song in FL Studio 12. Assumably your first song. Perhaps you just downloaded the demo or gone about some other means of obtaining FL, hopefully by purchasing it. And you are now looking to create some sort of song.